All right. Good afternoon and good evening, everyone. My name is Sabrina Kent. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Senior Vice President overseeing supplier diversity and programs at the National LGBT Chamber of Commerce. And on behalf of NGLCC and our Trans and Gender Nonconforming Task Force, I'm so excited to be a part of today's session, a beginner's guide to navigating the legal and healthcare systems for the trans community. So quickly before we get started, one of the reasons why today's session is so near and dear to our hearts at NGLCC is because this webinar is presented by Punch Card Films, which is a certified LGBT business enterprise of NGLCC. And they are the producers of a feature documentary called A Trans Story, which is about a trans couple on the path of transitioning. The film invites the audience to witness their journey over the course of 4 years, from legal name changes to marriage, to the start of hormone therapy, to significant surgeries and more. So Ed and Katie, the team at Punch Card Films, are currently in the process of raising funds for this film, and there's currently a campaign out. We would see you be able to support the development of this film and to get it into post-production. So that link is going to be dropped in the chat, and any support, any dollar, every single dollar counts to help support Punch Card Films and A Trans Story. So some logistics for today's session. Please let the Zoom, please know that this webinar is being recorded. You'll see that here on your Zoom, and you can ask questions in the Q&A tab. For the end of today's session, please try to avoid the chat. It'll be much easier for us to monitor questions through the Q&A feature here on Zoom, and we'll do our very best to get to all of your questions, including those that were submitted when you registered for today's session. So now it's my pleasure to introduce today's moderator, Ashley T. Brundage, who is a near and dear friend to my heart. She's the founder, president, and author of Empowering Differences, another NGLCC certified LGBTBE. She's also the immediate past and founding chair of the NGLCC TGNC Task Force and our current co-chair of the NGLCC TGNC Community Outreach Committee. So there's a lot of titles, all just to say that this woman is absolutely fabulous. She's amazing, and I can't think of anyone better to navigate us through today's conversation. So with that, Ashley, I will turn it over to you.
Oh my goodness, so much love for my NGLCC family. Thank you, Sabrina. Thank you for kicking us off and laying the foundation of why the LGBTBE's work is never done and how important a trans story is for us. And I'm excited to bring you through this conversation today as we have some amazing esteemed panelists who have joined us today. You got a little bit about me, and Empowering Differences is my organization that I run. And we do training and consulting, and obviously I just published a best-selling book on leadership and empowerment. I have to tell you that navigating the legal and healthcare systems while transitioning is definitely not easy. So take notes and listen to the esteemed panelists that we have today for you. We've curated a lot of thoughtful questions, and be actionable during the Q&A point to list questions. If we don't get to all of them, we will make sure that that we get those answers back out to you for those of you obviously registering for today's event webinar. The other thing I wanted to quickly just tell you is that this journey that we all are on and navigating the legal and healthcare systems is really, really important to understand and really seek out your journey, because each one of us has that journey specific to how we navigate it. Your own lived experiences and your own intersectionality truly matters. And no one person will be above all, end all, know it all scenario for any question that may come from today's panelists. Know that your situation is completely valid And I really want you to be passionate around digging deeper. So my thank you and my gift to you all is my self-assessment, which you'll get the link for that as a great way to dig deeper around your differences, around how you navigate what you do through your journey, right? It's all different. And that is going to be a good takeaway where you can access that from my website. And now I'd like to kick us off and start introducing our amazing panelists that we've gathered for you all for today's session. And I'll briefly introduce them all, and then we'll start with the first panelist going into. So all of the panelists, let's try and run through them. So they're all amazing. So no order in priority, but just how they happen to be on my screen. Thomas Odell is first. He, him pronouns, and if you're referring to him in the chat, is a visiting assistant professor of legal practice skills at Suffolk University Law School. And he practices litigation, international commercial arbitration in New York City. And he also opened his own firm as a solo practitioner. He has worked across the Name Change project and also done an amazing work with TILDEF, the Transgender Legal Defense and Education Fund. Definitely want to watch out for what he has to say during today's session. Our second esteemed panelist is going to be Nikki Easterday, and Nikki uses they, them pronouns. So remember, if you're referring to them in the chat, use they, them pronouns. And they are a health attorney and community health advocate, New York State's designated health insurance consumer assistance program under Section 1002 of the Affordable Care Act. So you know that they know that function of the ACA, and so think about questions that are going to really help guide this process, because I can tell you that Nikki will definitely be able to help us in that space. Our third panelist is Elizabeth Schwartz, who uses she, her pronouns. So same thing, remember to use she, her pronouns in the chat when referring to Elizabeth. And she is a nationally recognized advocate for LGBTQ+ people. She is also an author, just like me, so we have that in common. I knew we were vibing for a reason earlier, of the book Before I Do, a legal guide to marriage, gay and otherwise, and boom, there it is. And for 25 years, her Miami-based practice is focused on serving the LGBTQ+ community and family formation, dissolution, gender marker, name changes, and estate planning and probate. And last, but certainly not least, in my backyard, Kayla Emmons, who is the program manager coordinator for trans services at Metro Inclusive Health. See, I better get that right to get my hand slapped. I have to tell you that her work, she uses she, her pronouns, her work, and queen. She uses those pronouns. You can refer to her in that way in the chat. But the work that Metro Inclusive Health does and Kayla leads is instrumental. I can tell you personally that Metro saved my life in the fact that I showed up and there was transgender programming all the way back in 2008 and 2009. And I attended a group and I got counseling and I got therapy. So those resources around healthcare are really important. So she's gonna have some amazing SME subject matter expertise to really help you all know why the work and why community organizations are so important. Okay, so that was a lot. We have some amazing panelists. Let's dive into our litany of questions. And Thomas is up first. So we're going to spend a few minutes with Thomas, and then we'll kind of row through the rest of our panelists. So Thomas, let's get started with a brief overview of the name and gender marker change process, because I know you've been working a lot on this.
Sure. Well, the first thing, just to frame this whole discussion, to keep in mind is that in any area of law, there's always a gap between the law as it's written down on paper and the law as it actually operates in the legal system and in popular culture, the way people deal with legal issues. That's a universal reality of law. It's exaggerated in the name change context because our culture around bureaucracy has changed so much in the past, few decades. And it's even more exaggerated in the transgender context because the gap between how things are and how they ought to be is so great still. So that's just my opening framing of the issue. Specifically, there is a common law right to change your name in almost every state. About 45 states have a common law right to change your name just by saying that you have a new name. If you're sincere in that and you use a new name publicly, in work, in private life, then the law actually recognizes that in most states as effectively changing your name in the law. However, in parallel with that process, which is technically still the law, most legislatures have enacted a process for you to go to court and get an official order from a judge recognizing your name of change. And that, this is where the gap between, law and reality comes into play, because the culture of bureaucracies, the culture of employers, and the way the modern life works today really tends to favor that kind of order from a court. So the specifics of how you get that kind of order from a judge, I know best in New York State because I'm an attorney in New York. Also, back when I was practicing law, before I entered academia, I had a pro bono practice that involved doing name changes for transgender clients, and I did those all in New York. So that was about 3 or 4 years ago, and I know what that process was like then. It happens, there was an amazing transformation in New York law this summer. It's not effective yet, it'll go into effect in December, but the Gender Recognition Act was passed in New York State, which has really streamlined and made a lot easier the process of name changing generally, but especially for transgender clients. So there's a great new step forward in the law that I'll talk about also. Between the way things used to be and the way things are going to be soon in New York, you could get a sense, hopefully, of the continuum of different attitudes and procedures related to changing names, which hopefully will reflect a bit the way things are throughout the nation. There's a diversity of processes. So how did things used to be in New York if you were going to do a court-ordered name change? Basically, it was 2 steps. First, you would file a petition with documents supporting the truth of the petition. You would appear in court to answer questions, and you would receive a court order giving you certain steps you had to fill. Then the second step would be you'd comply with the order. You do those steps, which would consist of publishing notice that you were changing your name in a newspaper, giving notice that you were going to change your name to interested third parties. And then you'd go back to court with proof that that you'd given notice and published your name. And the clerk of court would recognize the finality of your name change. The new process for changing your name in New York has eliminated a publication requirement. It's streamlined it into pretty much a one-step process. The name change will be effective immediately. And it's greatly reduced any obligation that you give notice to third parties. It's also done something positive, which is prohibited courts from requiring that you give notice to immigration agencies of any kind. It's also made it easier to seal your case, to make it private, because the presumption is when you're going to court in any matter, no matter how big or small, that it's going to be a matter of public record, and that anyone in the public who's curious can look at the papers you filed and see what went on in that proceeding. Now that's not the case. If you ask for your case to be kept private, the court has to keep it private, order that it be sealed. And like I said, there's no more publication requirement, meaning you don't have to go to newspapers and talk about the fact that you're changing your name. Now, the gender marker process is different. Should I go into that?
Well, I mean, I think you bring up a lot of really amazing points. I mean, I'm just thinking about this from the way that I navigated it too, and especially as it relates to, you know, the laws surrounding name change ultimately were established to prevent people from outrunning money, right?
Exactly.
And so really, legally speaking, it almost seems like many of these are obviously critical to how people survive at the end of the day, but it's like, it's an oppression ultimately is really what it boils down to, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
and when you consider that,
I'm kind of going a little off script, but
no, it's quite relevant because if you consider the point I made earlier that you have a common law right to just change your name automatically, the court process is not supposed to be more onerous. It's not supposed to become a barrier. The presumption is you have the right to change your name. All that the court is actually allowed to consider is whether you're trying to perpetrate a fraud, whether you're trying to get away from a debt that you owe, whether you have spousal or child support obligations that you're trying to escape. Those are the kinds of questions that they do look into and that are legitimate for them to look into. You know, the reason that you're changing your name is not an appropriate basis for a court to deny your name change. They shouldn't even be asking, because you have the right to change your name for a good reason, for a bad reason, or for no reason. But these other elements are part of the process. You're talking about whether you have outstanding debts or there have been judgments against you, or if there's a pending lawsuit against you, those sorts of issues.
yeah. So I guess I want to make sure that we definitely ask the question relating to, obviously it can be very expensive depending upon where you live and the process that goes with that. Any other outlets that you think, obviously the Transgender Name Project and the Transgender Legal Defense and Education Fund is a great resource. Are there any other resources that you think would be really pertinent to mention?
Well, the name change project that you mentioned is part of the TILDEF. Right. I also know in New York, there's the New York Legal Assistance Group, which also known as NILAG. They have attorneys that handle name and gender marker change representation. Wherever you are, there should be, hopefully, some attorney, some law firm, some civil rights organization that will represent you for free. This is an area of great interest to the pro bono bar, and it's a worthy area where there's a tremendous amount of unmet legal need. So if you can't just find a lawyer off the top of the phone book, starting with community groups and organizations it's probably a good way to get a referral to find out who are the lawyers who are working in a pro bono basis. What are the legal organizations that are offering free services in this area? You know, your local LGBTQ plus community center is probably a good place to start to hook into that network.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great. And then I guess we probably have time for one more real quick one. Anything else around like document collection or any one of these other questions that we kind of have that we submitted that we didn't touch on that you want to highlight?
Sure. I mean, documents, depending on your particular situation, and if there are outstanding judgments against your debts, you would need documents related to that. Most jurisdictions probably are going to require a birth certificate. I had two clients who were born overseas, and we needed to get a birth certificate translated, to help the court understand what the original birth certificate said. With gender change markers in New York, that used to be an administrative agency process that did not involve courts, and you had to go to the DMV with a letter from your doctor describing your medical care for gender confirmation, whether the DMV or any other agency of New York State. That's been changed with the Gender Recognition Act. So you're no longer going to have to provide medical evidence. The Biden administration this summer just announced that to change your gender on your passport, you're no longer going to be required to submit medical evidence about your care or the state of your care or anything. But there are jurisdictions in the country where that is quite possible, possibly something they will require.
Yeah. All right, Thomas, this was good. So if you're watching and you're thinking about more questions specifically for Thomas, go ahead and go to the Q&A function and enter them, and we'll save some. We'll have some overtime since we started a few minutes late. So hopefully Thomas was able to stick over around and answer those questions that we might have. I wanted to shift gears and go to panelist number 2, Nikki Easterday, they, them, the health attorney at Community Service Society of New York. Nikki, are you out there? I guess our first question kind of centers around the insurance, because obviously healthcare is always going to be a barrier to access for many in our communities, whether someone's transitioning or not. Obviously, insurance is extremely complex system to navigate. How do you talk to insurance companies about transitioning, or anything else that you would add here?
Yeah, hi. So I think, you know, it bears mentioning, one, I really want to thank Thomas for that, you know, starting with the difference between what the law says and how it operates in practice. I think that's a very important framework, and I imagine it applies to literally everyone who's talking on this. Like, it's just true. Also, I think it's really important to take a moment to acknowledge that we have a very fractured healthcare system. So I'm going to speak really generally, because it depends on whether you're in a private plan, whether it's a public funded program, if it's somewhere in between. Like if you talk about a Medicare or a Medicaid managed care plan, that has like a really fun, and by that I mean sarcastically unfun, intersection of both, like of essentially private rules and public rules and the way they intersect. And then depending on the state, it's a whole nother ballgame. So I want to speak somewhat generally. My experiences with New York, which thankfully is relatively good, I think, compared nationally in terms of accessing gender affirming care. But what I love about the question, how do you talk to insurance companies about transitioning? My first answer is don't. And that sounds kind of odd, right? But what that really leads to is, you know, most people, they think, okay, I'm going to call my insurance company, I'm going to ask a question, I'm going to get an answer. Like, do you cover gender affirming care? Is this doctor in network? And I always, when I'm working with clients, say, there's no real repercussion for a plan to give you incorrect information. And they most likely will give you incorrect information. And so I would say a general theme of what I'm going to talk about is you want to get something in writing, and you want to look at things that are in writing, because that's going to give you a much better sense of how to move through your care. So I mean that sort of tongue-in-cheek, don't. You obviously have to communicate with your insurance company, but it's rarely the first thing, right? So ideally, you want to get these 2 documents, and these 2 documents are absolutely going to be crucial in figuring out, can you get what you're trying to get covered? And so one is the plan policy or the plan contract. There's a million names for it, summary plan description, etc. It's the legal document that talks about what your plan will and won't cover and under what terms. And then almost every insurance company has this thing called clinical criteria, also a million different names because there's no standardization. There would be a coverage guideline or a medical policy, and that's going to specifically talk about what they cover in regards to gender affirming care and what you need to show or to demonstrate in order to get that covered. A lot of this stuff is available online, and you will actually sometimes have to call your plan to request these documents. Hopefully you can't hear that motorcycle. So I would say that the first things you want to do is you want to get those documents, because that's going to give you so much crucial information. And if you enlist the help of a legal service organization, they're going to need that information as well. It's these are the 2 documents that I first, whenever I'm working with someone, I get. I will say that for most insurance companies in the United States, generally speaking, there shouldn't be like a categorical prohibition on gender affirming care where they're just like, no, under no circumstances will we not cover it. That you will still run into that. I still run into that. there was a recent Supreme Court case, Bostock v. Clayton or Clayton v. Bostock, that it looks like it's going to change how large employers cover, like basically what they have to cover. And so that should really remove some of those remaining, that sort of remaining categorical barrier. There are some other edge cases, but in general, I would suspect that you're not going to get something that says we just, no matter what, we won't cover it.
Yeah.
That's I think increasingly rare, although you still might run into it. And certainly if you're a minor, which I'll touch on in a little second. So what I would really point to is the major barrier to care for most people is that these plans have a thing I talked about called clinical criteria. And this is where they list every procedure they're going to cover and what they need to see to cover it. Now, ostensibly, they're based on the WPATH standards of care, the World Professional Association of Transgender Health. They typically deviate pretty significantly. And to be frank, the WPATH is like a decade old at this point or more, and it's not as strong as I think the members of our community really need it to be. But what you're going to see is most plans in this clinical criteria, that's where they put the barriers. That's where they say, well, you know, it's clinical criteria. Sorry, I just saw a question in the chat. So it's plan, contract, clinical criteria. Those are the two most important documents, at least in figuring out, you know, what kind of insurance do I have and can I get whatever it is I'm trying to get covered. So the clinical criteria might say something like, we don't cover facial feminization, or we don't cover breast augmentations. Typically, you're going to see this like, yeah, around, I would say, like sort of like more like more feminizing procedures generally tends to be more restricted. That's just a trend I've seen in insurance coverage. Or they might have like really robust or really strict requirements that you need to demonstrate, which I think is obviously disgusting, oppressive, I think was the term. Discriminatory, you know, harmful, violence, all of the things, right? Like it's really bad. So
well, you're leaning towards kind of the next question. So let me ask you that one, because
yeah,
obviously it really, you know, you talked a little bit about just kind of general insurance, but what about workplace, right? I mean, I know that I had the credit to serve on a panel one time, I don't know, like 9 years ago, with the medical director at Aetna, and they were telling me, they were like, oh, you know, it comes down to like $1 per employee to offer transgender medical benefits for major corporations. And I was like, really, that's it? And then I realized that that's trans light versus trans full, right? And that's what I've kind of nicknamed these two policies that exist. And now a lot more organizations are offering trans full coverage. But when you think about from an employer, for those that are employed, what do you recommend in that space around speaking to your employer first? Do you call employee relations? Do you contact the insurance company? Because I know that sometimes I get a lot of those questions in DM on Instagram. What about you?
Yeah, so I mean, ideally, you don't have to discuss this with your employer, right? And I think that if you have a plan, you know, even if you have a plan that's like has maybe restrictive clinical criteria, right? You can largely just fight the insurance company through the administrative appeal process without involving your employer, which I think is, you know, to the benefit of everyone, right? Is to not involve the employer. There are some situations where it's helpful to talk to your employer. These are what are called like self-insured plans, where they have more discretion over the benefit structure. I do want to give a shout out to TILDEF because TILDEF has a bunch of resources, both on figuring out what kind of plan you have, getting the documents that I talked about that are important, and a guide on talking to your employer if it's needed. So I would say prior to talking to your employer, unless you have to talk to your employer to get a copy of this document, is that you start the process with your doctor and the insurance company. Largely because if you can avoid having to have these conversations with your employer, I think that's for the best. You know, I mean, I'm sure there's like wonderful HR companies or like HR departments and stuff. You know, I think it's fine to say like, you know, maybe you don't want to have to talk to your employer about this.
But let's talk about the minors, because you were going to touch on minors. So let's do that really quickly.
Yeah, so minor access to care, particularly surgical interventions, is, in my perspective, sort of like the most current forefront of where this fight lies, right? Like we've had a lot of progress in getting coverage for a wide variety of services for adults. By no means perfect and absolutely regionally specific. But when it comes to minors, even in like progressive states like New York, we still have significant barriers, which is it is extremely difficult. I don't want to say impossible, but extremely difficult for minors to access surgical care. And I don't want to be discouraging, but winning those fights are quite difficult for a number of reasons. There's not a ton of medical literature to support it if you're doing the administrative appeal process, but mostly because there are these categorical exclusions in a number of plans where they peg it at age 18, and that's just from like a commercial plan. From a contract perspective, we also of course are seeing states try to like limit that by law and impose criminal penalties for providing gender affirming care to youth. I would, I wish I had, but here's how you get around it. And unfortunately, it's that I think it's important to know like that's going to be a fight, a hard fight, and a fight that might, very easily be lost at this point in time. I think, but because it's the forefront, I think there's a lot of advocacy working around it. There's more medical literature coming out. I do think that will change, but it's certainly, it's certainly, I think, the most challenging thing to access.
Yeah, I mean, it's emotional, right? I mean, honestly, just the work that we're in, like literally we're living in the trans civil rights era. Somebody in like 100 years is going to open up a virtual textbook and they're going to see all these amazing panelists' faces, and they're going to be like, these people were putting in the work. So thank you for that. Thank you for the work that you're doing, because it's going to make a difference. And sometimes it feels like it isn't, but it is.
Appreciate that. Yeah, sorry to end on kind of a bummer.
No, but I mean, it's important to talk about it. I mean, and hopefully we'll get to another question or two in the Q&A section.
Hopefully.
All right, so let's bring back in Elizabeth Schwartz, attorney, activist, author, and let's talk a little bit more. Let's start off with like fostering and adopting. I mean, I know that this is a big part of a marriage and being married, having a family and growing. Can you touch on those topics as trans parents and what you think there?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. And thanks so much for having me. I love learning from you all and sharing this information. And you're so right, Ashley, to say that, this is really a civil rights movement that we're all living through, and hopefully we are putting in the work now so that our generation, so that some of the struggles that we've experienced will be visited upon the youths. So I want to just also say that I'm like representing the like deep South. I'm here in Miami, Florida, the armpit of the nation, and with DeSantis, running the state. So while we have all these like fabulous progressive, representations from New York, sadly, we are in a whole other planet down here. And so yeah, right. And so I think that one of the smartest things I heard earlier was what you said, Ashley, about like the point here is like we're flagging some issues, but like we really encourage you all to dig deeper. There are a lot of amazing resources out there, and we're going to be sharing just some of them. You may see that I put in the chat while Thomas was speaking earlier a link to the Family Law Institute directory of the National LGBT Bar Association. So these are all lawyers who, like me, are hopefully culturally competent, that are vetted. I mean, everyone is vetted as working with LGBTQ plus families and individuals, and so that directory I think is a really important thing. So scroll up, and we'll send it out later as well. But there are lawyers in most all over the country and in most places, and so I think it's a good idea to if you've got an issue that comes up, to try to find someone who can help you. I'm also, I'll just say, I'm going to keep throwing stuff in the chat. I'm also a big fan of family equality, because you're talking about fostering and adopting, Ashley, and Family Equality has great resources on their website, like different equality maps for like foster and adopting and what the law is about around discrimination everywhere, and family leave. These things are really, oh, thanks, Katie, for posting that again. These things, they all vary state to state. But I'll just say this, like, spoiler, there's definitely implicit and explicit bias still with respect to transgender, nonconforming, gender non-binary folks adopting, being foster parents. There may not be like a specific ban, like there may not be, in Florida, we were the last state that had a ban on gay and lesbian people adopting, like whatever, it's just ridiculous. So that finally came down in 2010. So even though there may not be like a technical ban, you'll still find, oh, the caseworker isn't presenting you with potential situations. You'll still find that there's bias among the caseworkers, the social workers, the case managers who are making these matches. And so what I would say, back to resources, is, find yourself the culturally competent, the trans friendly adoption agencies and adoption lawyers who might be willing to see you fully. So don't go to Catholic Social Services like our recent Supreme Court case. You know what I mean? Like, it's probably obvious, right? But like, there's, we ask friends in the community, like, oh, who's cool? Like, who's willing to work with me? And I would also say, I'll just say one last quick thing. In the event that you do find that you've been discriminated against, it's really important. This is one of those, like, it's not what you know, it's who you know. And so it's really important to get help from someone good. Don't go rogue. Don't have like your friend, who's like a family lawyer but doesn't do this work. So there's NCLR, the National Center for Lesbian Rights. The legal director is Shannon Minter, openly trans guy. They've been doing amazing advocacy in our community forever and ever. That's the helpline I just popped in the chat. And then again, just with respect to resources for anything you may be going through, I also want to elevate, I love all the TILDEF love. I also want to elevate NCTE, National Center for Trans Equality, has also really great resources on their website.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, and I mean, obviously, the people facing these issues are not just the trans parents and guardians, right? It's the parents of trans children, and that's, we had that emotion. Me and Nikki had that emotional connection, I feel like, around navigating for the kids. Let's talk a little bit about the kids now, because I feel like that's a whole other realm.
Yes.
Yes. Just, the pot is on the stove and it's boiling over.
It is, and that happens so often, right? I mean, my advice is obviously get the best legal support that you can afford, and or organization that you can get to assist you. But the other thing, when you have kids involved, get a guardian ad litem. A guardian ad litem would be appointed by the court, and that's the voice of the child. And very often we don't hear the voice of the child in court. We have the parents fighting against each other. Oftentimes, unfortunately, we have the parent who's supportive of the child's transition or the child's identity, and the parent who's not. And so the parent who's supportive sometimes gets, faced with the brunt of custody battles and stuff. So very often a guardian ad litem is a great solution, because they're the voice of the child to the judge. So I serve as a guardian ad litem for trans kids all the time. And so, it's very common for me to talk to the therapist, do all that homework that the judge isn't going to do. And then report to the court, like, yeah, that bad parent, like, really sucks. And that awesome parent is amazing and super affirming. And so, so there are lots of ways in which child's voices can come into the court, and they should, and they must.
So so only one more minute left, but yeah, like
Yeah.
so
The other
why is it so important to know your rights?
Yeah, I mean, you know, we keep the law at such a distance from people, right? Like you go to law school and like taking all these loans and like that's the only way you can know what's up. And so like let's not do that. Like let's not privilege this information. I mean, that's why I think it's so important to democratize all these resources. I just did like a a gender marker and name change clinic with a bunch of lawyers pro bono in Miami this past week with this great organization, Trans Collaborative. Like, we need to bring the information to the people because if you don't know your rights, like that's when you get screwed, right? Complex legal term. That's when you get screwed. So please, like, know your rights, stand up for yourself. Don't take marginalization and delegitimization of your identity for an answer. And also, I just want to say, it's really important to tell your stories. Those of us in states that are facing these bans against trans athletes and trans affirming healthcare, like we need you to help us tell these legislators, right, that transgender, non-binary, gender non-conforming people are like humans and valid and exist and you can't erase us. And so so not only please sort of become informed, but also help us tell these stories so that we can make sure that discrimination is understood to be impactful to you and you and you and you and you and you and me, and that it's unacceptable.
Yeah. Oh my goodness, thank you so much. Yeah, you hit it home. Yeah, I mean, we have to be passionate, we have to be knowledgeable, we have to seek out the resources, we have to make the connections. All of that centers around empowerment, and I'm excited for us to hopefully connect more in this space, because I can just feel the passion coming through the screen. And so our last panelist, certainly not last in my book, but just by happenstance. And I'm trying to be a homer. So we actually have almost an equal split of New Yorkers and Floridians here on this meeting. But Kayla, let's talk about Metro and the work that you're doing, and obviously healthcare. It's Metro Inclusive Health, and it is the LGBTQ plus community center for the greater Tampa Bay area. Where can you turn to when you don't get the appropriate gender care? Let's talk about that.
Right. So I think hearing the voices, you brought up a great point, Elizabeth. Hearing the voices of the children is very important. I think working with our youth has been very important to me and very rewarding, actually. I get tons of phone calls from families trying to seek the language to speak to their trans children. And that's very important. So I think that when you are in need of resources, use your centers and community organizations that are here for those causes, for those reasons and for those particular, concerns, because we're here and we're all passionate about doing the work and we want to help people. So I think that it's been very rewarding. I am now the Trans Services Program Coordinator, and we've been able to implement different resources and different things just to help us and meet our clients where they are. If you need help, we have support groups, we have different things that are happening every day almost, just to make sure that we are reaching our community and making sure that those needs are being met.
Yeah, so speaking of the needs being met, so what kind of services are you all offering, like on a daily basis there at Metro?
So we do behavioral health therapy, like that's huge. So anyone that's looking to transition, we require that they go through their therapy, which you mentioned earlier, Ashley. So we have them to do therapy. We also are doing HRT services. We do help with like getting letters of recommendation, letters of support for our clients. We're helping with primary care. We're helping with HIV, HRT. There's so many different services that we're offering here at Metro. So it's like a one-stop shop for our clients. You can come here and get basically all your needs met.
And so what about people who are tuning in on today's webinar and they don't have an LGBT community center in their city where they live, and they feel like they're being ostracized or put on an island because there's not, they don't live in a major US city, which we know that obviously Centerlink is a great resource. And I don't know if someone wants to drop that website in as a resource, because obviously Metro is one of the Centerlink's organizations. But what are we recommending? I mean, I know that obviously coronavirus and COVID-19 has put forth major obstacles, but it also, I don't know, in my opinion, has opened up some avenues.
Absolutely. So one of the good things about COVID and the things that we've done, different barriers that we've faced, we've overcome them by making our services virtual. So maybe in your area, there's like a virtual, you can do things virtually now. I know that we offer our support groups virtually. We do behavioral health virtually. So you can actually meet with your providers over in Hilo app. And that app allows you to meet with the providers, still get your labs done, everything that you would normally do with here in the office, you can do it virtually. So if you're in an area where you can't maybe get to a facility or you don't know of a facility, then try and see there's like a virtual, something virtual in your area that you can go to, because it's really been working really well for us here at Metro.
That's amazing. All right, so transitioning doesn't just affect you.
No,
it affects obviously everybody, partners, friends, family. What else do we have as far as resources in an organization like yours?
So one of the most amazing things that we do with our therapy, with our behavioral health program, is that we not only have therapy for the actual clients, we have therapy for the entire family. So if you want to have your family come with you to a therapy session, we're able to do that like group therapy. Also too, myself and Rashida make up our trans services division. And we're both trans women. So we offer ourselves, in full disclosure, to kind of go over our lived experiences with clients. And this is much different than meeting with a provider or a therapist, because we actually have lived the experience. We actually are taking the medications. We actually are walking the walk and talking the talk. So I meet with the tons of families in person. We meet, and they're able to get a different insight of what it is to be trans. They're able to get more information, and they're able to talk to someone who is going through, these transitions. And most times families just want to know that their children are going to be okay and things are going to work out perfectly. And I think I've turned out okay, so I'm fine.
Oh my God, Kayla, don't sell yourself short. Well, why don't you just talk for a minute about like your journey to coming to Metro? I mean, I feel like it's really powerful too. So,
one of the good things for me is that I didn't set out to be a trans advocate. I came to Metro just asked to volunteer, and I was asked to interview. And I came to just help out with HIV, doing HIV testing, but our trans services division opened up. And when you are a person that is trans and you know the need for something, you have to take a moment to stand up. And I think standing up is what I had to do. And I think that it's very rewarding for me to give families that language to communicate with their children, because I didn't have that. Growing up, my mom probably wanted to help, but did not have the resources or the language to help me transition the way that I needed to do that. So a lot of my journey was done, by myself, self-medicating. And there's so many risks involved in self-medicating and doing things, Black market. So now that we have these resources that are available, it is so powerful for me to be able to tell these families where to go, how to get help, how to transition under a medical provider, under a therapist. And it's so good. And hopefully I'm like an aspiring therapist too. So my journey is not finished here with Metro. And I'm really, really, really excited about what's to come for me. But I think that the more I do learn, the more that I do grow, I can take all of these families and all these young trans people with me, even trans women of color as well, because we are definitely suffering from a lot of transphobic deaths that are happening. And it's just very powerful for me to be in this position and be able to help so many people like myself, and even people that are different. the trans groups that we do offer, trans feminine and trans masculine. We also have outside the binary groups that are ran by PRIN. So we have so many different support groups here at Metro, and the support groups are very important because it offers a sense of belonging, a sense of like family, and we have social and supportive groups, and then we also have therapeutic groups as well. So whatever you're looking for, whatever groups that you're needing or in need of, we can definitely be a support system for you.
Love it. Oh my goodness, I love it. Obviously, like I'm a homer, so there's that. But thank you so much, Kayla, for sharing kind of, you know, the looking into the looking glass around specifically the LGBTQ plus community centers, because the work there is just so valuable.
We're definitely looking to meet our clients where they are. So if you're out there and you're looking for a resource and you need help, just come. Even if you don't have a question just yet, we can help you to form that, and we can definitely get you the help that you need. So definitely.
All right. Okay. So we're in the Q&A section, pending the overtime, which I think we're doing pretty good considering we started a few minutes late. So we have quite a few pre-submitted questions. So I'll start with one there, and I don't know. I guess we'll figure out who wants to take this one. But the first one is, my daughter is beginning her senior year and has only begun socially transitioning. Her records are still under her old name and gender marker. How does this affect college application process? Like, should she apply under her prior name? And obviously, and then they go on to say that they're also considering a gap year, so that way they can arrange the legal stuff, name changes. Any recommendations? I don't know. I guess I'm trying to figure out who would be the best person to take this one on, but I don't know. I guess
Thank Thomas.
I was going to suggest Liz, actually.
I'm happy to take a stab at it. I mean, I have to say, I'm a huge fan of the gap year anyway. I think that's like super healthy, right? Especially
and this is not
now,
a fashion thing, okay? It's not.
It's not a fashion thing. This isn't like Gap, Old Navy, Banana Republic year. No, but actually, I think that's really, it's wise, because I do think that you should enter university in your affirmed identity. I think that would make all your records sort of align and be easier, you know. I don't know. That's my 2 cents. I mean, but if you can get it done, oh no, school is starting now. So was the question like, should the kid take a gap year right now?
They're in their senior year. So
they're in their senior year. Oh, you can get it done before. Well, whatever. I'm a big fan of a gap year anyway, but I'm sure you could get everything done before, right? In time. Kiel, yeah, I think everything can be done. What do you think, Thomas?
I think there's something good. I mean, leaving aside the law, I think there's a lot to be said for the value of entering university, because there's so much coming at you that's new in university. Your freshman year of college for anyone is like potentially overwhelming, or like, you know, it's designed to stress you, pull you, help you grow. And like, why not take a year to transition and live your new life, and also get the legal documents sorted out. Because, you know, every bureaucracy has its own database, and it's nice to begin your interactions with a new bureaucracy and a new database, the way you want to be, to introduce yourself the way you are, you know, without them misunderstanding, and then that can create extra kerfuffle later.
Kerfuffle. The only thing that I would just add to that, Thomas, you're so right. The only thing I would add is just to kind of calibrate understanding that, like, you know, there will still be like a high school transcript with your dead name, like the same way that as adults we still have a credit report with our dead name. Like, you know, it doesn't like erase your prior existence. So I think it's just good. I think it was the parent that was asking this question for their child, if that's what I heard. But anyway, just prepare yourself for that. Sorry.
Yeah.
I'll just add, in New York State, you can retroactively change old records. That might be available in some other states. That might be possible. That's a conversation to have with your attorney who's helping you.
Yeah.
Ashley, just for clarification, they're a senior now. Their name is not changed yet, but they want to change their name prior to going to college, correct?
Mm-hmm.
For me, I think it is important, like you said, to start your college experience with your new name. I agree. I think if they can get their name change done now, it should not take more than about 3 months. It didn't take me
Right.
very long to get my name changed, and those records, if they can be retroactively active, like redone, then I think that'll be great. I think just having that name, having them living as their authentic self and going into college as a trans person will mean so much. They'll be meeting new friends, meeting new people, having new experiences, and with that new identity, it'll make it a whole lot better.
You'll be free of living a double life, because I mean,
Exactly.
really think about that. Wow. All right, so we have a whole litany of others. I'm going to try to see if I can. So is there a way to change your name for free, right? Well, that all depends, right? If you can get a legal waiver, right, Thomas, I would say.
Yeah,
Right.
if pro bono representation would be free.
Right, but if the cost, you can get waivers to mitigate the cost, depending on
but that also depends on the jurisdiction that you're in.
Like I think that most jurisdictions have some form you can fill out, like an affidavit where you know, ours is called an affidavit of indigency, that says that you can't afford it. So I think most jurisdictions you have to kind of fill out some financial information and qualify.
Yeah.
Also, a lot of legal aid and legal services organizations themselves formally have name and gender marker change projects. I think TILDEF's name change project, they have like affiliate organizations, or maybe in CTE, whatever. One of them has like affiliate organizations that are like the legal aid and legal services in the different organizations, and they can help you with filling out the paperwork and getting those costs waived or substantially reduced, depending.
And actually, aren't some of the applications now, don't they have like a name used or a nickname, or so I think when they do the applications, they could put their legal name that they have now, and then also put like a nickname or a name used on the application so that it already prepares those schools for what's to come as well.
Yeah. So I see another question in here, and I guess this is probably going to be an easy one, but do you need a lawyer to change your name, or can you proceed without one? And I can tell you personally, I filled out the 48-page court document on my own after taking 5 years to save up to get the $450 fee that I paid myself.
Can I just give one other perspective on that, Ashley? Because not everyone's a badass like you. But the other thing is, so some jurisdictions have, like, so Florida doesn't have law that says you can change gender marker, but then it also doesn't say you can't. So I have like this whole thing I put together, including like a memo of law explaining to the court like why the judge can do this. So if you're in a fabulous jurisdiction like New York or California, I mean, there's many of them. In many cases, you don't need a lawyer. But I will tell you that in Florida, it's similar to like what you might have heard if you go into an immigration interview without a lawyer, like, and they ask you kind of inappropriate questions, and they're just like kind of so your likelihood of success with a lawyer in a jurisdiction where there's a gray area, you probably want to see if you can get pro bono counsel who can help usher you through that, especially someone who's like knows the judges. They say it's good to know a lawyer, it's great to know the judge, something like that. I don't know. So you want to have, you might want to have that. So just depending on the jurisdiction, I just wanted to put that out there.
So I want to loop in Nikki. So let's ask this question to Nikki. Is there a chance that you could lose insurance when you're in the process of changing your name?
I mean, I've never seen that, and I don't really even am clear on the mechanism by which that would happen.
If you're insured as this person and then all of a sudden you're changing your name, it's a fear that someone submitted a question. So
for sure. I mean, if anyone else on the panel is like, has some information, I've literally never seen that happen. I've seen people with like, which is very common, I think, just like a mishmash of paperwork with different names, like, right, like it's very hard to get, like everything all on the same name and like kind of all kind of concise and complete. So I've never seen that be a barrier. I don't think that I wouldn't really worry about that. I mean, you know, there are small things where like, you know, I mean, you can like change your name with the insurance company. But yeah, I don't like, you certainly couldn't lose your insurance. I mean, and I, you know, I want to say like you can't, but like I'm sure somewhere in the multiple iterations of like the travesties of health insurance, someone has lost insurance because their you know, like their name changed, but there's not like processes designed to do that.
And if you do, please let us know. I would tell you that at NCLR, Asaf Orr, who runs the trans project, would love to sue, because Nikki just elevated the Bostock case from last year that whatever, I won't get into it, but it's quite clear that I think that non-discrimination principles apply to, you know, trans healthcare issues as well. So if you lose your health insurance, I agree with you. I've never heard of such a thing, but let us know. Let's sue.
All right, last question. How about this? So can you just change one document, or should you change them all at the same time? Feel like this is like the juggling of the balls. Birth certificate, social security card, ID, marriage license, transcripts for school, right? You're thinking about all of these. Is this all, some, or one?
I think everyone's journey is different. So it's gonna look different for everyone. But I think that as time goes on, if you try to do everything at once, it's gonna be overwhelming. That's first. I think that if you just change what you need, change what you need and then progressively start to change everything else, I think that would make more sense to me. You know, even with my school records, I had to go back to school, so I had to change them later. So I did my ID, I did my ID first, and then I went to Social Security, and then, you know, everything else came after that. So I think just kind of taking your time and realizing that this is your own journey, and there is no right or wrong way to do it. So whatever it works for you, do it at a time or a pace that works good for you.
Oh my goodness, I love that. Do my legal experts want to add anything else to that, or can we end on that?
I agree with that advice.
I would say that it's wise to have your IDs like aligned, you know, sooner rather than later. So I 100%, you have your own journey. It's super overwhelming, but, you know, I would say get, you know, 10 or 15 copies of the court order, you know, take your time, but get it done, because it gets a little messy when you have like your ID says one thing, your passport says another thing, your bank statement this, you know what I mean? All the like real ID requirements, like things have gotten pretty crazy ever since 9/11, and it's gotten progressively crazier. So, you know, I just would say it's probably safest to have as much alignment as you can.
Nikki, you're good.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, this has been fun. It's been rapid fire. It's been back and forth. It's been a lot of passion. I've enjoyed each and every one of you, and thank you so much for attending. I want to pivot it to my amazing friend, Sabrina Kent, Senior Vice President at NGLCC, the National LGBT Chamber of Commerce, to close us out. So Sabs, you out there?
Thanks, Ashley, and thank you so much to all of our incredible panelists for today's discussion. I know I learned so much, and I felt like you all really contributed valuable perspective. And of course, thank you to each and every one of you for joining and listening in today and asking such thought-provoking questions as a part of the conversation. We will be sending out the references that were mentioned today, as well as the recording after the event. So I think if you have questions about today's session, you can reach out to the Punch Card Films team. I think they might be able to drop their email here in the chat. Again, Ashley and our panelists, thank you so much. I want to take one more opportunity to remind you all that today's session was being hosted because the Punch Card team is in the process of post-production for a trans story. So we really would really appreciate every single dollar that can be contributed to the crowdfunding campaign. They're going to drop that link there. Thank you for the Seed and Spark crowdfunding campaign link. Again, any dollar helps produce this amazing film. And finally, on behalf of NGLCC, our Trans and Gender Nonconforming Task Force, thank you again to Ashley, to our panelists, to the Punch Card team, and again to each and every one of you for being here today. And have a great evening. Thank you.